Hi everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff and I'll be your host for the show. If you've had an encounter of your own and would like to speak with me whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you. If you want to continue listening to episodes of the show on YouTube, nothing's going to change even after the subscription program begins on December 15th. Episodes of every show will be free of charge as always on YouTube if you want to listen to them that way. There will be commercials though. If you want to listen to episodes of the show without any commercial interruptions, that's when the subscription program comes in. If you want to find out more about the subscription program, please go to dogmanencountersradio.com and visit the How to Listen page. Again, that subscription program is going to start on December 15th. Tonight's guests are Al Santariga and Bryan Bowden. Al and Bryan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Vic.
Thank you, Vic.
Thanks for being here. Al, you did a show not too long ago with this. Bryan, you're a newcomer, so if you don't mind, please give us a brief bio on yourself first.
Sure, Vic. My name's Bryan Bowden. I was born and raised in New York City. I had a career in finance, and now I do business development, marketing, and a lot of technology data mining.
Sounds like you're really well-rounded. Al, since you've been on the show before, a lot of people are going to remember you, but for those who haven't heard you before, please give us a bio on yourself.
I'm 54 years old, married with two beautiful children. I'm a postal worker for the United States Post Office, and that's it.
Al, when was the first time you heard the term Dogman?
God, Vic, I think the very first time I heard the word Dogman was the first time I listened to one of your shows on YouTube. I had never heard that term before. I wasn't really sure what it was. So I tuned in, and then I seen what it was all about, and I've been hooked ever since.
When you first found out about Dogmen being real, did you get sick to your stomach when you thought back on all the times you had been out in the woods in the middle of nowhere by yourself?
No, not at all. I really never questioned my time in the woods. When I go into the woods, I go in there with a certain mind frame, and whatever happens, happens. But I will be brutally honest. The thought of Dogman being around me never crossed my mind. I always thought it could have been a Sasquatch, if anything.
When you hear a twig snap, it is a lot more pleasant to think that it might be a Sasquatch than something like a Dogman. I can definitely understand that. How about you, Bryan? When was the first time you heard the term Dogman?
One of the things I used to study is Native American history, and I've heard Dogman referenced once or twice, but it was mostly like a Wendigo or a skinwalker. The primary hearing Dogman and really doing the research on it came from your show, but via Al. Al's like, you got to listen to this guy. You got to listen to his episodes. And that's when I started really focusing in on just the Dogman name.
Did you have any adverse reactions when you thought back on all the times you had been out in the woods all by yourself in the middle of nowhere, knowing that a Dogman might have been around that you didn't even know existed?
Initially, no. I don't really fear going into the woods. It did cross my mind because of the investigation we did initially at Nuclear Lake. We were in the woods for a while by ourselves, and knowing that there is a correlation between Dogman being present when there's a Bigfoot present and vice versa. So it is in the back of my head because I'm always thinking ahead of what we can do to prevent any type of negative reaction.
Well, it's always a good idea to think ahead and plan that way. So that's admirable. How did the two of you become paranormal researchers? Al, please go first.
I met Bryan through a mutual group that I belong to called the UFO Roundtable. He was already a member there, and my brother, because of all my paranormal experiences, thought I should go to the group and talk, and so I did, and Bryan and I just have so much in common. It's like looking in the mirror. My brother said, Al, you should put your own team together, especially since you know all these guys from the round table now, and they're all serious investigators, they take it serious. And I said, okay, so I started picking out people who I thought I would be able to work with and who would be serious investigator. And Bryan was the very first person I chose because we're so much in common. And plus, he's got mad technical skills. He's amazing.
He does seem to have some really good technical skills. I haven't seen even close to what he can do, but from what I have seen, they're impressive. How about you, Bryan?
Thank you very much. It was great. I've always been interested in the subject since I was little. Before YouTube and anything, we had sci-fi movies and werewolves and Bela Lugosi. So I've always wanted to investigate these type of phenomenon and experience them in a way. When Al approached me, I was like, yeah, I'm good. Let's go. Let's try to do it. I've jumped on board full bore. I couldn't wait to start. So that's how we basically, hooked up. And Al and I are like someplace in the past life, if they want to believe in that, whatever. We knew each other. We're just so in sync and we work great together. I come from one direction, but Al will bring something else to the table and vice versa. So it works really, really well for us.
It does seem like you two make a great team, so I could see that. Bryan, now that you know dogmen are out there, do you prefer to research Sasquatch or dogmen?
Seeing as how much of an apex predator dogman is, and from your input, Vic, knowing that, 99% of these dogmen are really aggressive, contrary to some people's opinion that they're not, which I can't fathom why, I would prefer to encounter a Sasquatch than a dogman. But, curiosity kills the cat, and I would kind of like to see a dogman, but maybe at a distance. I don't know if I really want to put myself and anybody that I'm with investigating in that kind of harm's way. I think they can be very dangerous and harmful to anybody going out there. It shouldn't be taken lightly.
I can understand you feeling that way. How about you, Al? What do you think about that?
I want to research them both, Vic. I really do. I can't really pick one over the other. We've done a lot of research on the Sasquatch aspect of the cryptid side. Dogman is new to me, and I got to be brutally honest, because of your show, I've become addicted to the Dogman, and I really, really would like to see one again, like Bryan says, but at a distance. I'm the kind of guy, I'm old school. I need to see it to believe it. I've seen the Sasquatch up close and personal. I know they exist. So, every bone in my body tells me that these dogmen are real and they do exist, but I would love to see one again, but at a distance.
Oh, I can understand that. Speaking of seeing one, Al, you were on your way to work one morning recently when you saw something you didn't expect to see. What happened?
Yeah, it was around 5 o'clock, 5:30 in the morning, and I was getting on the Parkway, and I was just driving to work. It was pitch black when I noticed 4 huge yellow eyes coming out of the wood line. They were big, and they seemed to be walking bipedally together. They were the size of golf balls. They were coming out of the wood line, and they were coming towards me, and as I was getting closer to them, I started to slow down because there was no one on the Parkway that morning, and I was slowing down to see what they were. And I couldn't, for the life of me, figure out what it was. And as I got closer to them, it seemed like they started to pick up their pace and start coming towards me. At that point, the fight or flight kicked in, and I said, maybe I should just give this car the gas and get out of here. And as I started to pull away from the area that they were in, I noticed that they dropped down to all fours, and that their heads were bobbing up and down, almost like a German Shepherd when he runs and his head goes up and down. And I noticed that they were looked like to me, from where I was, they were on a scent trail, and they were just running along the wood line, along this grassy part of the Parkway. And I know that this Parkway, there's always deer out there grazing on the field and everything in the meadow, and I thought maybe they had caught scent or something and they were running it down. I didn't see any deer that morning on that area of the Parkway, but these 2 creatures, from where I was sitting at the time, looked to be about 7 feet tall. But I actually went back later on and did a little research, and I realized that the Parkway had been raised from the top of the Parkway down to the edge of the grass line was about 10 feet. So I'm going to assume the Parkway was raised about 5 feet high because of flooding issues in the past. and I'm sitting up in the Jeep, so I'm up another 3 or 4 feet. And, once I started thinking about it, and I was like, I thought these things were 7 feet tall when I seen them come out of the wood line. And I did the math, and I put them up around the 10 or 12 foot height, and didn't really think there was much woods where they came out of. And for some reason or another, I thought there was only about maybe 100 feet of wood line where they came from. So I went back and I did a little research, and it turns out that it was quite a bit deeper than I thought. The woods itself goes back almost a quarter of a mile. And as I was in there, I found a stream, and I noticed that there were all kinds of fish in the stream. Talked to one of the fishermen who was fishing one day, and he said that they stocked the stream with big-mouth bass and red-belly trout, I think he said. And so I followed the stream a little bit, and maybe another quarter mile down the road, it led to a giant swampy area, and maybe 300 yards to the south of the swamp was a giant lake. And behind the lake turned out to be a really large cornfield. And I started putting all these things together, and I was like, wow, there was a lot more there than I actually thought. Didn't really think there was that kind of woods in that area, because there is a middle school there, and I know there's like a 10-foot fence around the middle school, but that middle school is just on the corner of the property, and there was a lot more woods behind there than I thought. And then I noticed, as the days went by, I noticed an old-style Ford Bronco parked on the grass. And the first day I went by it, I just thought maybe it was a hunter, bow hunting season had started, and I thought it was just a hunter hunting in those woods. And then I started to really focus on the truck, and I noticed that on the truck, the license plates of the truck said DEP, Department of Environmental Protection. And I said, oh, this is very interesting now. So I kept an eye on it, and the truck was there for about a week, and I've never seen anybody in the truck. I never seen anybody get in or out or come to the truck. And then after that truck left, on the weekend, I noticed a green Ford pickup truck parked in the same area, only this one had all the decals from the department, the DEC, the Department of Environmental Conservation. And that was there for a couple of days. And I really didn't mention anything to anybody, because I didn't really know what was going on. I didn't want to assume anything other than what I've heard in interviews regarding the Dogman and these agencies. So I mentioned it to Brian, and Brian said, you should do a little research and see what's going on. But then after the weekend had passed, the pickup truck was gone as well, and I haven't seen hide a hair of anybody in that area to this point.
When you saw those Dogmen, was it too dark out to make out what color their fur was?
Vic, it was pitch black out. And when I tell you, all you seen was 4 yellow eyes. And the way they were walking was strange, Vic. I don't know if they walked with some kind of bounce in their step when they're bipedal, but it also looked like their necks were bobbing and weaving up and down. And you couldn't make out an outline of the creatures themselves, but you could just, I don't know, maybe it's me, I just felt that I could feel the outline, like the energy coming off of them was strange. I mean, you could just feel like they were darker than the darkness, except for those 4 eyes. It was a very, very strange encounter.
Yeah, sure sounds like it to me. The way you describe those eyes bobbing and swinging side to side, that sounds like a creature that's got a neck of some kind of length to it. If it were Sasquatch that you had seen with almost no neck, I don't think you would have seen that effect. So with that in mind, I really don't think it was Sasquatch you were looking at that morning.
No, me neither. I tell you what, I've been told by psychics and mediums I'm intuitive, and I don't claim to be anything other than a regular guy who gets gut feelings, and my gut that morning screamed Dogman. Just everything about it. Because like I said, I had a German Shepherd for 14 years, And I know when he walked and when he got down on his all fours and he got a whiff of something, I seen the way when he was just walking casually, how his neck would bob up and down. And I seen how stiff he would get when he was on a scent trail and he was tracking something. And that's exactly what it looked like to me.
I'll bet you're right. I'll bet you that's what was going on. Do you subscribe to the idea that once you have a Dogman encounter, you're more likely to have other encounters?
Originally I would say no, but I do. I think experiences has changed my opinion on that. I kind of have a feeling that once you are linked to these creatures, whether it be Dogman or Sasquatch, you tend to find yourself in areas where they are. And I don't know if that's just from their energy and your energy being drawn together. I don't believe it's a coincidence. But yeah, I think I do, yes.
I see. Bryan, how does your research style differ from Al's?
I take everything into consideration when I do my research, from I look on the scientific side all the way over into the, oh my God, I can't believe you just said that type of really craziness type of theories. And then I start whittling it down to get an answer. I think both inside and outside the box. Most people don't jump anywhere near outside the box, but I'm always there because there are plausible explanations, but there are also things that are just theory that you can find, like, well, this fits with this theory or that theory. So I'm giving everything as much attention as possible, and then I whittle it away. That's how I do research. It's been pretty successful for me and yielded some really good results.
Yeah, that does seem to fit. After talking with you, you do seem to be very methodical, so I can see it being that way. Bryan, what kind of interest do you have in seeing a Dogman at close range?
Doing all the research that we do, from everything paranormal, including cryptids. Again, Dogman is an apex predator, in my opinion, and from what I've researched, it's like kind of approaching a rabid dog or a dog on a defensive and backed into a corner. So I'm not really ready to jump into that full bore. I would like to see one. It's like Al had mentioned earlier. It's not that I'm old school. It's just like when you see with your own eyes, it's more believable. So I want to have a little bit of an encounter, but not a dramatic encounter. Of course, during our investigations, if it happens, it happens. And thankfully for your research and your program, there's ways of dealing with that encounter that will increase your chance of getting out without having an issue, like slowly backing away from something like that, not losing sight of its eyes. Just you back away, you don't turn around and run. So it's always in the back of my head, but I'd rather not. I'd rather have you go out there and get the information for us, Vic, and get that video and throw it up there and say, wow, this is really good, because it's just too dangerous of a type of cryptid.
Yeah, you do only have one chance to get that situation right. If you make a mistake, it might be your last. Al, you and Bryan found what looked to be a den at a place called Nuclear Lake. Please tell us more about that.
First time we went out to Nuclear Lake, we went out and did an investigation. It's a place of high strangeness, and we were up on a ridge line. We heard 3 whoops, and we knew there was a Sasquatch down below us in the swamp. Even though we couldn't see it, and we had night vision cameras and full spectrum cameras and thermal imagers and everything else we had going, we couldn't see what was down there. Time had passed, and we decided we were going to go back. I was being drawn back to the swamp, just back to the swamp. I didn't want to go to any of the other locations where we found Sasquatch structures or Karens or anything like that. I just wanted to go to the swamp. I don't know why. So Bryan and our other cameraman, Bill, said, look, you're not going by yourself. We're coming with you. And we went back. And, of course, when we go into the woods, Vic, you got to understand, we don't go in unarmed. I don't allow anyone to carry any handguns or rifles or anything like that, but we always have 18-inch machetes, 10-inch survival knives, pepper spray to protect ourselves, because these are the woods, and there are large predators in the woods, whether they be black bear, mountain lion, or packs of coyotes. So we go in, protected ourselves. And thanks to your show, now we know how to protect ourselves somewhat against Dogmen. I've learned a lot personally from listening to your show. But we went back in and we were drawn to the swamps, and we got to the swamp, and really didn't see anything out of the ordinary. I mean, we've seen some wood structures and some archways and some breaks, and weren't really sure what to think about it. But something told me to jump up on this giant rock. There was a giant rock there, and I jumped up on this rock. And then once I got elevated, I noticed there was a pathway that led into the swamp. So our cameraman Bill jumped up there with us, and Brian jumped up on there, and we're all looking. And Bill, zoomed in with his camera, and he said, "What's that thing in the middle of the swamp?" And as we were looking, at first you couldn't notice it because of the way the trees were bent over and everything, and it just looked natural. But then once we started really focusing in on it, I said, "My God, I think it's a den." Then Brian said, "It is a den. Look at the way it's all built, the structure and everything." And then once you started really paying attention to what you were looking at, it was like you'd seen it through a different spectrum of light, and you could see all the ambiance differences that this thing was compared to the nature of the woods around it. So Bill, our camera guy, jumped off the rock and decided he was going to follow the trackway in. I told him, "You're not going to be able to get in there." And he walked in, and he got in about one step and sunk down to his knee, and Brian and I had to pull him out. So Brian said, "Well, we can't get into that swamp today, but I'm going to get a drone, and we're going to fly that drone in there. We're going to see what's in that den." Later on that month, we had our monthly meeting, the Bronxville Paranormal Society. We always do a monthly meeting, but, and always review all our evidence. And at the evidence review, we had like a 60-inch flat screen that we're able to use. And on the flat screen, when we pulled up that still of that den, we noticed, I don't remember who noticed it first. It was me, Brian, or one of the other guys on the team, but it seemed like there was something staring out from it, growling at us. And then as we started really to look at the photo itself, you could see what looked like a huge canine head, jet black with ears and a snout facing, I would say, south. Meanwhile, this other creature, which was a little bit smaller, was facing straight out towards us, and it looked like it was snarling at us. And then I think it was Brian who noticed to the left of it, there was like 3 pups. 2 of them looked Dogman-ish, but one of them, to me, looked Sasquatch-ish. It was a pretty impressive photo once we started dissecting it and seeing things. And, and all our stuff, and we post our stuff on our website or on any social media sites, we post everything up raw. We don't do anything to clean it up or edit it up. I mean, some stuff Brian may run filters through to brighten it up or something like that, but we try to always post everything raw, and Brian could explain better than I can as far as how he cleans his stuff up, but there's nothing other than, either brightening it or darkening it. We don't touch it up in any way, shape, or form. We try to put out what we see. What you see is what you get, and that photograph, which is really, of course, we have to go back to Nuclear Lake again, but now it's cold up here in the Northeast. We have to wait till the spring. Brian, you want to explain how you do that with the technology side of it?
Sure. When we get video, audio, pictures, we'll just look at them and we study them. Some of the images, because of lighting, are too dark. I have a couple of programs where you kind of just play around with the gamma on a professional level and just lighten it up a little bit, and it does bring things out because you're adding a little bit light to it. So that's what I use. We don't add anything to it. We'll show you case of one of our photos. It was black, it was darker. You see people in the photos in one investigation, and then as you add a little more gamma to it, it lightens it up, and then it brings out things that were hidden in the dark. That's all it does. It's not adding anything to the photo. It's just allowing you to see what's in the photo or the video. And then we'll post the original, then the light and gamma, and then at certain points, we also invert the video and the photo to see what it's catching on the inverted side, which is the dark side of the negative. And sometimes it pulls out like, wow, you can actually see outlines from that because it's just pulling out what's actually there. That's basically it. But it's like Al said, we post this as raw, then we go review it, and then if we find something, we'll post what we find. And we just allow everybody to take a look at it. If someone sees it on our YouTube site or the Bronxville Paranormal Society.com on their investigations, we want to hear from you. If we miss something, we would like to go back and check it. And we're always constantly, we review our stuff almost immediately, but we wait a little bit and then we go back and review some things again. just to see if we made a mistake or if we can catch something else. If someone points something else at us that we should be paying attention to, we actually go in and take a look at it. That's how we pretty much do it.
Al, from listening to Bryan break down how he handles evidence like that, I'd say you've definitely got the right tech guy on the job.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you.
Bryan, when I put the Bronxville Paranormal Society together, Bryan jumped on board as executive technology guy. But Bryan is way more than that at this point. He's like my partner 50% of the way. And he put countless hours and hours of time into the technology side, and not only creating the website and hooking us up with every social media network in the free world, but I mean, as far as going through the evidence, it's such a painstakingly task to sit through frame after frame or listening to EVPs. And he's got a 10 times much better ear than me. I don't hear anything the way he does. He picks up the most slightest sound, and then he just works it and works it and works it until we can figure out either what they're saying or what we heard. It's just, he's amazing. He really is. He's an amazing guy.
Thank you. I appreciate the compliments. And it is a long, arduous task. I mean, going through all this evidence and having my kids and, regular life take place, it does go into the wee hours of the morning. But I'll tell you, Vic, when you come across some kind of evidence and you actually capture something, I mean, today Al and I both still go like, I can't believe we got that. It's like the Dogman. You don't want to believe it's real, but you know what, people? They're real. And Sasquatch is real. And whether you choose to admit to it or not, that's your end. But I'm presenting it as real. I'm not trying to push an agenda or anything. We capture this evidence. We present it. You can make your own decision from that.
Yeah, the Dogman that's standing in front of you, he doesn't care if you believe he's real or not. Bryan, one night not too long ago, you two heard the freakiest howl you've ever heard. Please tell us about that.
Sure, Vic. We headed back to a previous investigation called Letchworth Village. It's a 24,000-acre asylum that was used at the turn of the century for, unfortunately, unwanted children, disfigured individuals, mentally frail. We went back there to go through a couple of the buildings we missed that we wanted to go to, but especially to this cemetery, which is a couple of miles off, where they found hundreds of unmarked graves a couple of years ago. And we wanted to pay our respects to the people that went before us, but also to investigate it. So we headed back into the Stony Point Vales area of New York, and we made a visit to the cemetery. And initially, we walked through the cemetery during the day. We did a little bit of an investigation, walked around there. There was a path that led us up to, there's almost like a utility area corridor that butts against the cemetery. And we decided, there's a path here, let's go take a look. And as we're walking up the path, none of us was thinking anything about Bigfoot or Sasquatch. It was just a cemetery. But we noticed some dogs barking in the background. A lot of dogs, actually. There was at least 6 different types of dogs barking there. And I can tell you that from my personal experience because I happened to grow up in a show dog family. And I know about almost every dog that ever existed because I know what they sound like when they bark, what they look like, going to all these dog shows. And Al decided, you know what, I'm going to do a tree knock because we just do that every once in a while. And Al, the minute he did a tree knock, all bets started going off. These dogs just stopped dead cold. No more barks. And the only time I've ever heard about it or experienced it is in Bigfoot country, which is pretty much every state of the union now. So we just started to go from an investigation of a cemetery into there could be a possible Bigfoot in the area or a Sasquatch. Let's fast forward from that. We went to the village after the cemetery for about an hour or so, and then we came back to the cemetery at night to conduct our investigation. And while we were there, and Al was recording on audio as well as his clear video, there was one really big, I don't know if it's a bark or a howl or something, and we both noticed it, and you'll hear on the audio, wow, that's a big dog. I think Al mentioned something about a shepherd because he's more familiar with the shepherd than I am. And I think one of us said it was an angry. I mean, it sounded angry, actually. And it was big, and it continued to go from that point forward. Now, you have to understand something, Vic. When I'm there, I wasn't thinking Dogman or Bigfoot at that time, even though we did see some evidence of it, some tree structures and the vine that's going through the trees that there's no way you can do that without being probably about 12 feet tall. I don't think the utility workers are doing it either. They're there to do their job. There's nothing man-made about it. It is a kind of anomalies. So I was focusing more on our investigation of the cemetery, possible spirits, EVPs, and then that's when we heard this big dog slash noise, an angry dog. And Al mentioned it to me a couple times. Did you hear that? Do you hear that? It sounded very Dogman-like, because we both have researched Dogman vocalizations, Bigfoot vocalizations. I mean, that's what we do as far as our group is concerned. And I must have missed it, or I was just too focused on everything else that was going on that night until Al sent me this video. And then I sat there and I listened to this video, and you clearly hear, to my surprise, what Al thought he lost on an audio cassette he got on the video, the FLIR video. And there's definitely a big, big dog making its presence known. Now again, I said earlier, there was about 6 or 7 dogs barking when we were there earlier. This is one dog. I've never been in a situation, even in homes, where one dog barks and none of the other dogs will chime in. Usually when a dog barks and there are other dogs in the area, they're all going to start barking for some reason, because that's how that breed, those canines operate. This was one. Sounded very big, very large, and pretty angry. And you listen a little bit more on the video and you hear clearly a growl. I mean, it doesn't sound like it's too happy. So I presented this to Al and we were just blown away by that. It blew my mind. To compound that even further and going back to that, when we decided to leave because it started really getting colder, and, you know, when you sit out in the cold, Vic, your back kind of gets, everything starts to stiffen up. And we've been there for a while. We decided to go back to where our car was parked. Now, mind you, where the video was taken, and you're gonna, you know, if you hear it, our car was parked pretty much in line with that, away from where we were, maybe 100 yards or so, or 200 yards in that direction. And as we're walking back to the car, where Al put his car, we both caught some pretty big eye shine and what seems to be like a nature preserve. There's a couple of trails there. And I've seen deer eye shine, I've seen bear eye shine before. This is big. I couldn't make it, but it was down very low, and it was very much aware of our presence, probably about 50 yards away from us. So, you know, we both made mention to it. It was in the back of my head because you don't know what it could be. It could be a mountain lion or something like that. I'm sorry, people, but I had to relieve myself, and I actually urinated. And once I started to do that near the car, this thing kind of like either crashed down lower or it just disappeared altogether. But that was the last we saw of it. But we were paying attention to it at that point. But that's pretty much what happened when we were up there and we heard that initial howl.
I just wanted to backtrack a little bit, Vic. When we went to Letchworth, we were actually supposed to go out with the Bigfoot researchers of the Hudson Valley up at Red Hook. We were supposed to do a day-night investigation with them at their hot spots, and we had it planned for like 3 weeks, and then they kind of bailed at us at the last minute, and Brian said, well, let's just go back to Nuclear Lake. We already got the gear packed and everything, and I said, you know what? Let's not go back to Nuclear Lake. I'm being drawn to the cemetery at Letchworth, because the last time we went there to do our investigation there, we didn't know what a cemetery was, and we couldn't find it. So I was being drawn there. I don't know why I was being drawn there. Just being drawn there. As soon as I mentioned it to Brian, Brian jumped in with both feet. He said, yeah, I'm there. Let's do it. And when we went there during the day, Vic, let me tell you, I thought this cemetery was going to be like every other cemetery in the free world, with roads driving through it and gates and this and that. And when we pulled up to this place, there was a little gravel, and it was in the middle of the woods, hidden. You couldn't see it. You had to go up a path that went like 200 yards around the bend. You couldn't see anything. And then when you got there, there was a giant monument, maybe 7 feet wide by 5 feet high. And behind the monument, and then the monument had all the names on it. And behind the monument was just big hill with no tombstones, just crosses with numbers on them. Except for the Jewish part of the cemetery that did have tombstones. Just a few of them. But we went there as paranormal investigators. Cryptids were not on our mind, the furthest thing from our mind, Vic. We had no idea that we would have any kind of incident with cryptids. And when we started the day investigation, like Brian said, we were doing EVPs, and we had a phonetic generator going, and we had a ghost radar going, and we were following the path up towards the electrical towers and everything. Like, we were just walking and doing what we do, and like Brian said, the dogs are barking, and I started to notice how woody the area was. It was a really, really wooded area, and I said, could be Sasquatch, prime Sasquatch location. So I did that tree knock, and that's when the dog stopped. And what Brian failed to mention, as soon as I did that tree knock, our equipment went crazy, Vic. The phonetic generator started spitting out all kinds of words. The ghost radar said there was stuff all around us in every different direction. And then at one point we came down off the hill and we were back in the cemetery. And Brian was off doing his own thing at one end of the cemetery, and I was being drawn towards the woods. And I got to the wood line, and I'm looking in the woods, and I'm not seeing anything but woods. And I'd say to myself, man, what am I not seeing? You know, I'm being drawn here. There's a reason I was drawn to this section. What am I not seeing? And then it was like a veil was lifted from my eyes. We started finding wood structures everywhere. Once we've seen one, we've seen them all. We've seen structures, Vic, that were so beyond strange. It was unbelievable. We're talking about trees that were 20, 30 feet long, a foot and a half thick, wedged up into giant oaks in between other branches, and a circular pattern. It looked to me, the only way I could explain it, it looked as if it was a half-opened umbrella. And I called Brian over and I said, Brian, look at this. What could this possibly be? It can't be any kind of shelter. This can't protect you from any of the elements. It's not a hunting blind where a Sasquatch would hide behind to ambush a deer or something like that. I mean, and Brian said, you know what, Al? Dogmen are always seen in and around cemeteries. Maybe this is like a dogman's marker telling the Sasquatches it's their territory and not the Sasquatches. And I said, who knows? Maybe you're right. And then we started walking around. And I felt like we were being drawn into the woods. And we really started to get deep into the woods when I said, you know what? I feel like we're being pulled into a trap or something. It just got that vibe. Don't ask me why. It was a beautiful sunny day. We could see for miles there weren't any leaves on the trees or any leaves on the bushes. And I said, Brian, you know what? Let's just back out of here. We're getting pulled in too deep. And we just didn't want to be there. It felt like we were being trapped. And we backed out. Brian really wanted to go back to the insane asylum, the village, because he wanted to get into the synagogue and a few other buildings that we didn't get into the last time. And we did that, and then we came back after dark, and we parked. I must have parked a quarter mile away up the street on the right-hand side where there was a trail. There was trail markers there. And we hiked down from that location. And that night when we were sitting behind the monument, because we made the monument our base camp, all that crazy howls and stuff were coming from the direction of where the car was parked. And I can honestly say with all my heart, we had no idea that we were going to run into any kind of cryptid animals. We were just strictly going there as paranormal investigators, trying to get EVPs or IR images of shadow figures or stuff like that. That night was really, really strange. I mean, we actually ran into a couple of the locals who came in on a quad runner, and they were running around with them. We tried to interview them once or twice, and the first time they said no. So then I flagged them down the second time when they came in. They came back in later on. Like Brian said, we were there for hours and hours. We were having all kinds of technical difficulties with our equipment. Night vision goggles weren't working, and my digital camera. The night vision goggles were on, but it wasn't showing any images through the camera lens. And the digital camera said that the battery was dead, but every time I turned it off and turned it back on, there was a full battery. It seemed like the only thing that was really working well was the thermal imager and the infrared camcorder. But the second time these kids came down on the quad runner, I stopped them again, and I said, listen, you know, you don't have to be on film or anything. We could be an audio interview using fake names, and we're talking to these kids, and that's when we heard that really crazy second howl. And the first kid said to the second kid, we got to go, and they left. And Brian said to me, Al, maybe we should leave as well. You know, what do they know that we don't know? And I said, you know what, Brian, let's just hang out a little bit longer. Let's see what happens. And it was full moon, and it was a crystal clear night, and then all of a sudden, clouds rolled in, and the moon got creepy, and it looked like a Hollywood werewolf movie, I swear to God. And then the mist rolled over the cemetery, and it got really creepy. I mean, really creepy. And we were sitting there looking at each other, and I don't know if it was the energy of the cemetery, but Brian kept saying to me all day, "What's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? You don't sound like you. You're not acting like you. You don't even look like you." And I was like, "What are you talking about? How do I not look like me?" You know? And I didn't want to admit to him, and I don't know why I didn't want to admit this, but I was in a euphoric state the whole time I was at that cemetery, and I did not know why on God's green earth I would have this euphoric feeling. But that's where I wanted to be, and that's where I wanted to stay. I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to leave during the day. I didn't want to leave at night, but the temperature dropped like 20 degrees on us over there, and it really got cold. And going back to the car, I didn't notice the eye shine immediately. Brian spotted it because it was on his side of the car, the passenger side of the car. And then we looked, and then we really started to focus in on that eye shine. And like Brian said, there was a path, some kind of path that had tree markers on it, markers on the trees. And this thing, whatever it was off that path, maybe 10 feet off the path, in the middle of the woods, just sitting there. And to me, it looked like a big canine sitting on its hindquarters, like a Great Dane or something like that. The eye shine was high, Vic. It was at like the 5-foot level. And it was big. And when I seen those eyes, it brought me right back to the Parkway. And we were looking at it, and Brian's taking photographs of the eyes. And he got photographs of it. Amazing. And then it blinked, and when it blinked or it shut its eyes, it disappeared. I couldn't see it anymore. And I don't know if it went down on its belly and was crawling towards us or crawling away from us, because it was not a deer, a buck, or anything like that, because it didn't jump and twist and run off, and you didn't hear it scurry through the woods. This thing went silent, and it went invisible. And Brian decides to urinate on a tree, like right next to where this thing was, and I'm like, "What's wrong with you? Let's get in the car. Let's get out of here." And he's like, "Well, I'm marking my territory like a big dog." And I go, "Yeah, well, this thing is going to jump out of the woods. It's going to be mauling you as I drive away, because you better get in the car, you know?" And Brian goes, No, sometimes when you do that, it shows them that it's your territory, not theirs. And I was like, "Okay, no problem. Let's just finish up what you're doing and let's get on." And at that point, we drove away from that place. But we didn't even have any idea what we captured that night on any of the evidence until we started reviewing the evidence. And then it was just amazing. I'm sorry, Vic. I just wanted to put that in there.
No, I'm glad you did share that. Brian, some students from NYU interviewed you for a documentary on paranormal researchers recently. Now they want to do a field investigation with you. When are you going to take them out on that trip?
We're going to plan something good, safe version of an investigation. I don't think we're going to take them over to Nuclear Lake just yet, unless they really want to go. But we may be going back up to Pine Bush, New York, trying to investigate a doctor's house that was abandoned. We had some success with. When we bring people with us, and we always like to bring someone who is not necessarily a skeptic, but has never experienced anything like that before, because when they do have some kind of experience, it does put validation to the research and evidence that we collect. We want to do baby steps with them. They're young. They're doing some work for the school / whatever production that they're also working with outside of their assignment in that documentary. And we just don't want to throw them to the wolves, if you would. So we're going to find a decent type of investigation coming up when it gets a little bit warmer, so we don't have to freeze out there. It does get very cold in upstate New York, where a lot of the investigations do take place, and I don't know if they'd be prepared for a long haul at that point. So when it gets a little bit warmer with them, we'll go.
Vic, maybe I could answer that question a little bit better, in the sense that when the professor from NYU called us and told us about the documentary and wanted us to be interviewed, and then after I sat down, Brian sat down with the girls for like 2 hours, and they interviewed, and then I followed that up with like a 4-hour interview, and I actually brought all of our equipment that I have, and I had like 3 tables worth of stuff. And when they started hearing, all the stories about my personal experiences and about the team's experiences, they asked if they could go. And immediately, Bri, you know what I thought? We should take them. I think it would be safe enough to go, and still something they've never experienced would be the ancient stone chambers.
Yeah, I was thinking that's a pretty safe bet as well. But, something that's not too risque, because, look, they want to go on an investigation, and granted you have to be responsible for yourself to a certain degree, but I really don't want to put somebody in a position where they're not prepared for it. And, stone chambers would work, which we have some really good success with and are very interesting. But we'll figure that one out, I guess, Al, when it gets a little bit warmer.
Yeah, Al, absolutely. And the girls from the NYU, one of them lives down in South Florida, actually not too far where I had my Skunk Ape experience. And the other one lives in Ohio. So neither one of them have any idea what the ancient stone chambers are, because they seem to all be in the Northeast. So I think it would be a really eye-opening experience for them, and a learning experience to see these stone structures and to just experience them, especially when we go in there and you're looking at these stone structures and it just looks like there's nothing there. And then you hit the walls with either the UV flashlight or the IR flashlight, and stuff just pops out of nowhere. You start to see images and letters or runes or whatever they are. They just magically appear, and I think it'll really blow their minds.
If you were mean, you sure could take them out and show them a time they're never going to forget, but that's awfully nice of you to take it easy on them.
We always like to invite at least one person who's not associated with the team to validate anything we find or we don't find. Someone who has nothing to gain by validating our evidence. But I don't want to put anybody in harm's way. And I'll be brutally honest with you, before we even take them to the stone chambers, I'll have our psychic read their energy just to make sure it's safe for them to go, because we've had experiences where we had to leave people behind because they had subconscious fear, so everything is really taken into consideration when someone comes out with us. We just don't blatantly bring people along.
Yeah, and one thing to add to that, Vic, about our psychic, actually, it's roughly around our first investigation of Letchworth Village. One of the other areas we wanted to, or we were considering investigating, were these tunnels underground up in Rockland County. We were just talking amongst ourselves, Al and I, about it, and like maybe we can do that. We can figure out the time. Well, our psychic actually called us up, called Al up, very nervous and adamant. Said, "What are you doing with those tunnels?" And we didn't know how she would have known about it. And then again, she's a psychic, so that's how she knew about it. Let me explain an experience that she had. She's in Arkansas, mind you. She actually had an experience. She was somehow in the tunnel. It's pitch black, and she came up against a creature that scared the living out of her enough to wake her up in the middle of the night. She got out and she started salting her property, her home, and then doing a cleansing of her home. And that's how rough and scary it was. And what she described was basically something would be called a Wendigo. I don't know how versed you are in the Wendigo, but they do fall in the line of the Dogman. It is almost like a werewolf-ish type of Native American creature, and they are not nice, they are vicious, and they are apex predators. So we kind of, when she came out with that, we backed away from those tunnels, although they always are in the back of our mind. But again, we don't want to put ourselves in a harm's way situation. That's why we protect ourselves before we go. We do prayers and protection after we leave. Some people just go Yahoo and jump in. You can't do that in any of this, be it a paranormal investigation, be it Bigfoot, be it Dogman, whatever. But that's how you get hurt and that's how you get killed. And we aren't like that.
And just to add one more thing to what Brian was saying, Vic, I was speaking with a researcher recently, Sasquatch researcher from Kentucky. This guy, big-time researcher, spends a lot of time out in the woods, and turns out that he didn't know that he was supposed to protect himself, like sage or say a white prayer before and after he went into the woods, because he figured, well, I'm just out here, looking for Sasquatch. Maybe I get lucky and capture a Dogman as well. But something dark attached itself to him, and this fellow is actually going through exorcism right now to get this attachment off him, because people don't realize there are things out there in the woods, dark things, and that whenever you go into the woods, whether it's just hiking for the day or out there doing an investigation at night, searching for a Sasquatch or Dogman or whatever, man, you have to protect yourself at all times. Physically, emotionally, spiritually, you have to protect yourself because there are things out there that we just can't see with our naked eye.
If we knew about everything that was out there in the woods, I really wonder if anyone would ever venture out into the woods again.
I don't think anyone would ever go into the woods.
Yeah, I'd back away from those things.
I think you're right. Bryan, around Thanksgiving, you had an interesting experience while staying at a hotel in Maryland. Please tell us what happened.
Sure. I normally go down to my cousin. She's in Delaware, and we usually stay at a hotel in Delaware near the University of Delaware. But that was booked solid, so I had to find some other accommodations, and I had to find one which is like an exit away in Maryland, Elkton, Maryland, to be exact. And we're, driving there with the family. You're going down some really two-lane, dark country roads and cornfields and lots of woods and preserves. And it's kind of, it's woodsy. It's creepy. I've been through it before because I've spent a lot of time in summer camp. And I wasn't really paying attention to that. But where you come out to where this hotel is, there's very little homes there and very little any type of traffic. It's very woodsy. So we were staying there, and we had to stay on the second floor, which is a ground level. And I went outside to the right of where our hotel room is, and I walked outside to smoke a cigarette. And I'm smoking, and I noticed that it's exceptionally quiet. I mean, it's way too quiet. Even though it's chillier outside, you usually hear something. You see some squirrels because you see them during the day. Nothing. So I'm focusing on the woods, and I'm looking, and it's dark. And at one point, in the distance, I see what looks like an amber green, like eye shine, two eyes, and they're separated apart. And I'm like, wow, that's pretty interesting. And you have to understand where I'm standing, it's on a grade of about 3 feet. These eyes that I'm seeing looking at me, well, from a distance, is about a foot taller than I am. I'm 6'1". So if you do the math, it's about 10 feet tall. And I'm watching, I'm looking, and something catches my eye to the left where most of the streets are, and I kind of look over, and when I look back, they're gone. So I don't really pay much attention to it. Go back inside and come back out again and have another one a couple hours later, nothing. Well, when I wake up in the morning, I kind of look, and where I'm looking and where I was looking, it's a clear type of trail. And there are certain things that are in place on the trail that I find very interesting, intriguing from my paranormal and cryptid experience. There are clear markings of trees being bent significantly higher up, making archways, like you'd see with Bigfoot or Dogman. Nothing dramatic, just bends that are not natural to the location. I'm looking around, and to the right of me is that field is an Amtrak line. There's no houses back there. There's a stream, a little bit like boggy type of area, and I'm like, wow, this is kind of Sasquatchy. So I start doing a quick little research on my phone, and I discover at that point that not only is it Sasquatchy, but there have been Bigfoot sightings in the area and also a werewolf sighting in the area not that long ago. So 2 + 2 is 4 for me, and I'm like, okay, this very well, I could have seen something in the woods. So let's fast forward to day 2. While I was there at night, I'm standing out there and I'm looking, and now I'm more curious. I have the flashlight, I'm looking around, and it's just something about it. I start getting a little, I guess, inside your stomach, your gut feeling. I'm like, something's just not right. I'm looking for footprints, don't see anything, don't hear anything. Light another cigarette up, and I was about to do a whoop. And something said, you know what, don't do that. That's not a good idea. And I just got out. I said, I've had enough. And I kind of got this feeling like you don't want to be on the side anymore. So I went back inside the next night, to go out. I went to the front that second night instead of smoking on the side. Well, the last night I was there, we stayed 3 nights in the hotel. I'm watching, I'm looking, and again, I'm out the side, and I'm smoking a cigarette, and I start hearing something moving that's rather big in front of me, and it's kind of like very cautiously stepping and moving closer to my direction. And I hear to the right of me something moving around. my brain starts kicking in and I'm start thinking, and it sounds like something's trying to focus my attention directly straight ahead while, coming around the side, kind of pin me into a spot. And I also hear what sounds like a gurglish, or like some kind of like an animal would make. There's a certain sound. My dog used to make it when they were looking at certain things or moving in on a position, like when they were creeping in and crawling into position, like just before like a kill or for my dog, it would be, pouncing on another dog or person to play with them. But I don't think this was play. And it was at that moment I said, you know what? I'm done. And I walked and I went back inside, and I don't normally do it, and it wouldn't stop if it was this Dogman type of creature. I locked the door up. I put a couple of things in front of the door, and I just didn't tell the family, and I went to bed because I don't need them to be worried about that or scared. I have young kids, and I don't discuss some of the scarier aspects of what we do because they're young, and I don't need them terrorized. But I was very nervous that night, and that morning after that third night we left, and I let Al know about it. I thought it was peculiar initially, but now I have a feeling that was the third moment. That was a setup. If I stayed out there longer, I really do have a feeling I would have had one of those encounters that I may not have walked away from. It had that type of feel to it. I don't really get scared too often or nervous like that. And that night after that, I started hearing the creeping. I was uneased by it. Enough to get out.
And let me just validate that for Brian, Vic. I've known him long enough now. We've been in some hairy situations. Brian's not one that scares easy. And for him to be worried that much, for his family's safety, something inside him told him that there must have been an apex predator over there. Like that night when we seen those eyes in the woods by the Jeep and they disappeared, my gut told me that this thing must have went down on its belly and it was crawling, and I felt it was crawling towards us, not away from us. So, I know Brian. We've been in some really sticky situations, and he doesn't scare easy. He's a big guy, and he's like me. We're from the city. We've grown up on the street. We don't scare easy. And he called me, and he said, Al, I got to tell you what happened. And I could hear the fear in his voice, And I know it wasn't fear for his own safety. I mean, I'm sure he was worried about. He was more afraid for his family's well-being.
I've listened to enough of your shows, Vic, on the Dogman, and I've also researched enough some other shows as well. And I've heard of numerous stories of what the Dogmen will do is they're not solo predators. They're not there by themselves. And no one should ever think that, you're just only seeing one. Usually what happens is you have this creature and it gets your attention. I've heard plenty of stories where it got the attention and one's sneaking up behind it, around it. It loves to do that. They work in pair and tandem. There are many animals that are predators that do that. Coyotes do it. Wolves will do it too. You're distracted by one and meanwhile you got one behind you and it's ready to pounce. And that's the feel I kind of got that third night. I'm like, something was going to take place. And like Al said, I'm not Mr. Macho or whatever, or, big guy. I prefer to avoid situations that, you don't need the hassle. That was a situation that could have gotten out of hand really quick, really fast. And it was real. My mind doesn't play tricks on me like that. I don't do things like that where you get, two people get scared and all of a sudden the imagination takes over. I was very well aware of my faculties. I knew what was going on, and I knew from my experience this was going to get out of hand. I got to back away, and I backed away. Didn't come out the rest of the night.
And just to add something, when I was being drawn into the woods that day at the cemetery, I felt like we were being drawn in a trap. I had the same feeling like that Brian got that night in Maryland. I felt like we were being flanked. And I just felt like we were being drawn in by, like, I don't know, an infrasound or something. I don't know, because we didn't actually see anything like he did in Maryland where you actually seen the eyes. I just felt like we were being drawn in, and I felt like we were being flanked. And that's why I said, Brian, let's just back out of here and regroup. So I know the feeling he's talking about that, feel like something's coming up behind you, I'm always thinking about creatures that do that. They let you see them. They'll flash their eyes or growl, and then when you got all your focus on them, boom, you get hit from behind. There's always something flanking you. And the Sasquatch basically do the same thing as well. They're never really out there alone. They're out there in groups. So you're always being surrounded by these creatures. So you have to be very careful when you're out there,
I'm glad you two follow your instincts the way you do. At any time, did that experience make you second guess whether you really wanted to research cryptids, Bryan?
Believe it or not, it kind of enhanced it a little bit. Now that I know how this thing operates, and the more you know about it, the more you know how to kind of combat the way it operates. And I don't want to go solo into a research situation. I would never recommend it to anybody, especially myself. But knowing that you have somebody there, like Al and I, when we had the initial whoops and we had a bluff charge there, one of the guys starts to run because it was bluff charge to them, and Al grabbed them and said, stand your ground. And there's something to be said about standing your ground. But we created like a pyramid where everything was pretty much covered. And I don't mind researching it. I'm going to go and research it. It's always going to be in the back of my head because we do have Bigfoot country where we go into, and it's always going to be there. So Al and I know that don't just focus forward, be aware 360. So yeah, I'm going to go there. I'm going to investigate. May have to bring the pens with us this time. But, it's not like meeting the Bigfoot. I'd rather have the Bigfoot throw another boulder at me, which it did the first time, than actually come up against the Dogman. But if it does happen, we'll play it at that moment, and we'll try to back away from it and give it its space and move on to fight another day.
Well, thanks to Vic, now we're better equipped for a Dogman encounter as far as like whistles and air horns and even like flare guns and stuff like that. Knowledge is power, and you empowered us, which helps us control our fear in those situations because we know that we have, and even bright strobe lights at the Sorian. We come prepared now. We're like Boy Scouts. We go prepared for anything we may encounter.
Yeah, Vic, we're not going out there. We don't want to hunt it or hurt anything like that. I'm not a hunter. I don't have any firearms whatsoever. And I know that it's one thing, and I've researched and I've heard on your program, you bring a firearm, they know exactly what this thing is. And that actually could amp up the aggression because of it. We don't have one. We have studied ways of, because none of us are licensed at this point for firearms, how to protect ourselves in the event of a predator type of attack, be it a bear, a mountain lion, a big cat, whatever, and including Sasquatch or a Dogman. So we do research it, and all it's going to do is actually, we're trying to buy us enough time to get out. I don't want to hurt these things. I'd love to see them and study them and know what they are and maybe get an understanding of like, okay, well, you stay on your side and I'll stay on my side. But I thank you very much for your program and the education that comes from it because it's incredibly valuable.
Well, it's always good to hear that something that's been shared on the show has helped anyone. And I've got to give credit where credit's due. David Kyleman, he's the one who had that great idea about bringing an air horn for self-defense against these things. That's a great idea.
Yeah, that was a tremendous idea from him, and kudos to him coming up with that. One of the things that we did come up with, and we were thinking about it, is, believe it or not, a flare gun. It is a 12-gauge shotgun type of a flare, but what it may do is, apparently these creatures do not like bright lights, and most creatures are fearful of fire. And if you can create an event or a fire type of event, which will put a barrier between you and the creature just enough so you can get the heck out, that's about as far as we're going to go. We're not going to reveal that unless it's absolutely necessary, or use it unless absolutely necessary. We're going to go through the air horn, the strobes, anything, just to give us that space. Like, look, you're a big guy. You stay there. We're backing out. You win, and we'll all live for another day.
Well, that sounds like a great way to handle it. A woman who lives in the Red Hook area of upstate New York seems to have had a strange Dogman experience. What can you tell us about her experience, Bryan?
That's Gail, and Gail has a home that's up there near a really big, it looked really swampy, but it was like a pond, river, swampy-ish type of ground. And she has a wonderful tackle and bait store. She rents out boats and stuff. But on the property is an older house, and in the front of the house is kind of like a closed-in porch where she does keep her computer, and she actually sleeps there a lot more, probably because she does work on capturing some of the evidence, reviewing her evidence into the wee hours. And mind you, they have really great evidence from cats and photos. So we went up there because I discovered they posted a picture doing a seminar showing a cast of some kids, and clearly in the photo there's a Dogman, and I wasn't aware if they knew about Dogman or not. So I wanted to caution them, so I contacted them, and that's how we created a relationship, and we went up to their property. And while we were on the property, she mentioned the handprint that's on the front of the house that would open up that little screened-in porchy area, glassed-in porch area there. And it's really interesting because the handprint is not your normal handprint. If you put your hand up and look at a handprint would be, it's the reverse of that. So they're kind of figuring out, like, how the heck did it twist its arm? And I said, the reason why you have the handprint that way is because this creature was on your roof, and it was looking in from above. That's how the handprint got there. And it was very enlightening for Gail at that point because I think that took her by surprise.
You could see a light bulb light up above her head when Brian mentioned that. It was amazing.
Right, and one of the photos that she did post there of Dogman was to the left of that screened-in porch area where she sleeps, mind you. There was a Dogman print. It's your atypical, it's kind of a triangular-ish, where you get the haunch on the back and you get the claws in the front, like the tri-claws in the front, was right by that window that's slightly open. So there is evidence that the Dogman has been playing around or paying her a visit. One of the things she let us in on was her store is kind of attached to the garage near the house. And on the store, she has a buzzer that rings inside the house with one type of sound. It's different from the front door buzzer that has a different type of sound. And one of the nights recently, after we were up there, I believe, about 3 o'clock in the morning, she got a buzz on that doorbell on the shop and one alternating to the front door. They got her nervous, and she came downstairs with a gun she has. She has shotguns and stuff, and she's a hunter or was a hunter. And something told her, don't go out there. But when I heard that, because of your show and my research on Dogman, that is atypical of what the Dogman does. For some reason, I don't know if it's because it's the teenagers of a Dogman. It seems like the ones that are going through that teenage period are more aggressive, and the ones that are reaching out and messing around with people more and are more apt to attack, that play in the cemeteries. But as soon as I heard that, the first thing I thought was Dogman. And when Al mentioned earlier we were supposed to do an investigation with them up on their property, she mentioned to Al, well, do you want to go to the West Trail or the East Trail? The East Trail is more Dogman and the West is more Bigfoot. I got to be honest, I said, let's try the Bigfoot first and see what happens. So she does have them on the property. She has pictures of them kind of watching the Bigfoot and the Bigfoot young on the property. We've seen them. And it's something we're definitely interested in, and we will be eventually going up there and checking out. And we most likely will be checking out both pathways to see what we can get and see what we can see.
And just to mention, when we were there, Vic, you could see that handprint. The oils of the creature's hand was still on the window. And I told her to throw some baby powder or talcum powder over that handprint so that would bring it out so she could get some photographic evidence of it, because it's hard to film the oil off of the reflection of the glass with the sun coming through. And I said, you should do that. You should do it like right now before it rains,
I'm not sure if she did or not, but you also have to understand, I'm thinking on a Sasquatch, because they don't have those big nails that most dogmen have, those, claws or whatever, you're going to get more of a handprint with the fingers and the digits. This thing, you saw that whatever was pressed against it, there were probably big enough claws that prevented the full fingers from coming down, because it went up to just a certain point, which would contribute to the fact that it had claws and it couldn't fully get to that palm-sized print. It was a very interesting print, and I got to be honest, if I lived in that house, I'd be pretty unnerved.
For good reason. I can only imagine how creepy that would be to turn around and look out that window and see a Dogman hanging upside down looking in at you.
She told us she was pretty freaked out when both of those bells rang at the same time. Because like what Brian was saying, the one for the bait shop actually rings at the back of the house. Obviously the front door rings in the front. And they're different chimes, and they both went off at the same time. That means there had to be two different creatures pressing those bells at the same time. So that was strange.
You hear all these Dogman stories, and rustling at the handles of doors or pressing your front buzzer. I'm thinking if I'm in the woods and I'm getting a buzz at 3 in the morning from both directions, you know what? I'll live without it. But I did suggest to her that she should put some video cameras or a camera on the roof. You can get some inexpensive IR cameras that'll go up there and you can just run video at night and see what is coming around. I mean, again, not that you want to see a Dogman on video, but that could be an interesting, great evidence catch if she decided to do that.
And I mentioned that she should throw some game trail cameras up too around the property, because there's a lot of different pathways to her property, her backyard. There's like 3 or 4 different trails that actually lead into it. Where she actually rents the boats, I believe it's a natural lake, but it could be a reservoir as well. I'm not really sure, but I think it's a natural lake.
I know who Gail is, and it does seem like for the longest time she's had activity on her property. I sure hope if she does have that much activity that she keeps eyes in the back of her head.
Vic, she has a 12 gauge right next to her computer.
Yep.
Believe me, I've seen it. It was there.
It was 100% there. But you know what's very interesting about Gail is that Gail and her crew, they seem to have a really good rapport and relationship with the Sasquatch in the area, which seemed to be protective, I think, of her. So maybe, unbeknownst to her, she has these little hairy guardian angels that are preventing Dogmen from really doing anything too much to her. But yeah, she's got some really great activities and amazing evidence. They really do.
Well, it sure sounds like it.
As a matter of fact, I got a text from Deb, Gail's partner, today in response to the copy of that 18-inch track that I found when we were out there at that time. She said she was going to talk to Gail about getting us a copy of that Bigfoot track. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Al, when you're in an area with clear cryptid activity, can you tell the difference between Dogman sign and Sasquatch sign if no footprints are present?
It's really, really difficult, Vic. I'm no expert by any stretch of the imagination. Seems to me, though, that the Sasquatch, when they do make their shelters, they seem to make them like almost like a teepee or a lean-to kind of thing with really solid, heavy branches and stuff like that. Something that could actually really protect them. And from what I see of the Dogmen, it seems more of a shelter kind of thing where you're using branches with leaves and stuff like that. Maybe they build some kind of frame first and then cover it with branches and leaves and stuff like that. But the Sasquatch stuff looks heavier, a heavier kind of construction, I think.
Yeah, there does seem to be a difference. Being able to tell between the two, that is the hardest part.
Absolutely.
Before you two give your closing comments, would you like to promote the BPS?
Sure. You can go to Bronxville Paranormal Society.com and you can visit our website. And from there, we're pretty much on every social media outlet that's there, I think except for Pinterest, because I just don't figure out how that would fall into play there. But you can see our videos on YouTube, we're on Twitter, we're on everything, Facebook as well. We have a company page that promotes our posts from the website, and then we also have a discussion group on the paranormal and cryptid. So that's where you can find us.
Well, that makes it really easy. Before we do get out of here, how about some closing comments?
This whole adventure, as I like to call it, it's pretty interesting. And again, if it wasn't for your show, I probably would sleep a lot better. But, you know, it's very interesting because you see all these things in Hollywood and you think it's a Hollywood thing and what have you. But from our research and from what we do, it's kind of unbelievable to wrap your head around the existence of these large creatures, but they're real. They do exist. There are plenty of people that, Vic, you've interviewed with and I've heard that have a lot more to lose than gain, that have some significance in their life where they have the ability to put people in jail for a long, long time. And they have come forward and presented this to the public. They can't gain from it. They can actually get hurt from it big time, and they can lose a lot of stuff financially as well. So when you take in consideration that, and you take in consideration what they're talking about, which is dogmen, which can be anywhere from 6 foot on up to over 12 feet tall of this huge apex predator, it's unnerving. But for us, it's also very interesting and it's intriguing. I do want to have an encounter. I don't think I want to have a close encounter with it, but I want to have enough of an encounter where I see this thing for real, and I'll go from that point forward, whether I want to go back into the woods or not at that point. But it's very interesting. I can't thank you enough for all the hard work you do on both your shows, especially Dogman, and bring all this to the public light.
Let me just close by saying, Vic, thank you for educating me on the Dogman phenomenon. Really had no idea that it even existed. Like Brian said, that werewolf stuff. I mean, even though I have family history of werewolves back in Italy from the 20s and 30s and stuff like that, that my family swears to this day was the truth. The more I heard your show, the more I've learned, the more educated I became, the more obsessed I became. Thank you and all the other paranormal hosts out there who are into the cryptids, who put all this time and effort and energy into educating us, the general public. Thank you for everything you do.
Well, thank you too for coming on the show and sharing all this information with us. You know, it's a lot easier to sit back and host a show like this than it is for an eyewitness to come on and talk about the most traumatic incident they're ever going to experience. In my opinion, the thanks really goes out to the eyewitnesses. But thanks again so much for coming on the show, and I hope you both have a great night.
It was our pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Vic. Our pleasure, totally.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.